we're going to start today's session with a very similar framework to what Amanda has talked you through. Okay, so principally we're going to build the stroke from a position of aquatic alignment, and we're going to focus initially quite extensively on the kicking action. So the reason with butterfly that we're going to talk a lot about the kicking action is because in my role at the moment within England programmes, I spend a lot of time visiting clubs, and we do tend to, in the coaching community, talk quite a lot about kicking from the hips. And what it often does is it cues to our athletes that they don't actually have to use their torso as part of connecting the limb actions of the arms and the legs. Okay? So actually what we really want is for the kicking action, or the body wave as we refer to it, to actually be initiated from the sternum rather than from the hips. Okay? And that way, what we're trying to get over to the athlete is that the torso is very heavily involved then in connecting the arm and the leg action and ensuring that the stroke actually has that continuity and flow. Okay? So some of the things that John and Amanda went through in the breaststroke session, some of those principles will still apply, and we may just check back in on those just so there's an understanding of maybe some of the same exercises being applicable for butterfly as they are for breaststroke. Because the commonalities between butterfly and breaststroke are that they're both what we call short axis strokes, and they both require the body to avoid rotating. All right, so principally what we want within the stroke is we don't want one shoulder or one hip dropping lower than the other side, otherwise we'll have an asymmetrical arm action or an asymmetrical leg action. So quite a lot of the drills that we've already been through on dry land will still be appropriate to use in amongst your fly technical sessions as well. Okay? So we're going to start off with just some kind of body wave kicking to get over that principle of using the torso and initiating the kick from the sternum. So I'm going to ask the athletes to put their snorkels on and their fins to start with, and get yourselves in the water for me. If you don't have a snorkel, don't worry, just pop your fins on. And we're going to watch AJ first of all, and what I'm going to ask him to do is kick at the surface of the water, first of all, very, very slowly, okay? I'm going to get him to put his arms by his side, and I'll talk to you about why I'm going to ask him to do that in a second, okay? Because the purpose of this drill is to pattern the body wave action, all right? So fundamentally, when I watch how AJ's moving, my biggest concern is he kicking from the sternum? So is he pressing his torso in the water, and is he initiating his kicking action, his body wave, from the sternum rather than maybe from the hips or even worse from the knees? Okay? So I'm going to get him to do 125 to start with, really super slow to see that engagement of the torso. Okay? So you see we've got that nice aligned position on the surface, but there's quite a lot of movement through the upper body, okay, because we want that interconnection. We still see the resulting action, so we still see the hips rise and fall, and we still see the heels come to the surface and drop through beneath. But principally what he's doing is he's practicing kicking and pressing from the sternum, okay? AJ, could you come back again for me again? Just nice and relaxed speed. One more time for me. And with some of your athletes, you may really need to encourage them to do this even slower. All right, so AJ's a senior international athlete. He's very effective at patterning this kind of movement. All right, but equally, you may need to ask them to actually do it even slower to make sure that they truly are pressing that chest into the water. You see his head's also quite still. There's not a lot of movement from the head, okay? So that's another position that you want to cue in terms of the technical position.
Cool bit now. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to progress that drill. Now, in many cases when we see people doing kicking practices or body wave practices, they will immediately put their swimmers into an overhead position. So what I'm going to ask all of the swimmers to do now, Anthony and the junior guys, is we're going to do 325. I'm going to ask everyone just to really slow down that first body wave kick. So really, really slow, probably at half the speed that I saw most of you do it just then, okay? We're going to keep the arms by the side, and coaches, what I want you to be looking for is just that pattern of the chest driving into the water and really kicking from the sternum, okay? We'll have a short rest at that end, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to ask each of the swimmers to put their arms into an extended position in front of them, so effectively an overhead when they're in prone lying, okay? But their hands slightly apart, so at shoulder width. And what I want you to look at from a coaching perspective is, does that change the patterning of the movement, okay? So for each individual swimmer, putting their arms overhead compared to being down by their side, does it actually change the way that they're initiating that body wave, okay? And then the third 25, we are going to go into full streamline. So again, we're going to stay at the surface, we're going to keep that kick super slow, but we're going to see if we get any change of patterning from being in a streamline position, okay? So it'll be 3 25s, we'll take probably 15, 20 rest at each end, in each of those 3 positions, but really slow body wave actions, okay? So off we go. The point we're trying to get across today is, does the drill fit the purpose of what you intend it to do? Okay, so we want the drills to reinforce the correct movement pattern. So there will be some swimmers in the pool that when they change from being arms by the side to being arm overhead, they will probably start to kick more down at their hips and their knees. So you have to ask yourself within your coaching practice, is it actually essential, if I'm working on patterning the body wave from the sternum, that I have the arms in the overhead position? And the answer probably is that you don't need to do that, but you work on removing some of those restrictions in the overhead position whilst patterning that body wave. All right, so we don't always have to do all of these drills immediately in an overhead or a streamlined position. Okay, so the second one, arms extended but at shoulder width apart. We can come back on that one for me. And coaches in the audience and coaches at home, just have a look at each, maybe just pick one swimmer to have a look at. Do you see any changes with the way that they're actually patterning that kick? Yes, I know there's one's got their head up. A bit high, yeah. So, just as an observation from the group, we have a couple of swimmers in the pool who, because of their head position being forwards rather than downwards, that's also kind of locking out that upper part of their body. So the fact that they've got their head in the wrong position is actually preventing them from being able to kick from the sternum and really engage that torso. So again, when you're looking at the drill, is the drill being done in exactly the way you want it to be done? Because there may not be any physical restriction around their thoracic mobility. It may just be that in that aquatic alignment position that Ewan referred to this morning, if they're not in that right position, it will then affect the drill and it will affect the subsequent movement pattern that you get. Okay? So we'll go to the third drill and we'll go into a full streamline position now. All right, but again, let's make sure it is super slow. We're trying to drive that chest into the water, okay, and the head is in that neutral spine position, face facing downwards and eyes looking forwards, okay? Off we go. We'll just do the ankle mobility bit and we'll come back in a second, is that all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so as coaches, what you can do now is if you've gone through some variations of that practice, you can decide which arm position is most appropriate for each individual swimmer. So, John and Helen, I'm going to get you to prescribe an arm position for your athletes. AJ, if you can do it one last time with your hands extended, so arms extended but shoulder width apart, please. And then swimmers, your coach will give you the progression that they think is appropriate for you. And then we can go back one more 25 on that final progression, okay? Am I ready then? So Anthony's been out of full training for a while, still doing a little bit now and again, but he's equally stiffened up a little bit through his thoracic spine, and certainly with regards to his shoulder mobility. So I can see a change in his patterning between the extended but slightly apart and the full streamline. Okay, so if I want the drill to just be about patterning that body wave, I need to make sure that the athletes are in the right position to do that, okay? Now, I'm going to get AJ just to jump out for me and pop over to John again. So the next thing we're going to talk about is just the need to end that kick effectively. So we've talked about where we initiate from. Last year, we spent half an hour at the start of the symposium looking at streamlining. And one of the things we drilled down on was around ankle mobility. So we've gone through that kinetic chain with Amanda. We've talked about some of those restrictions that will generally affect the athlete getting into that aquatic alignment. We also covered it earlier on with Ewan. What we're going to do now is look at some ankle mobility, because at the other end of the kick, we obviously need the athlete to really be able to work the water. Okay, what we're going to move on to next then is some vertical kick work. So we've talked about the principle of the body wave, where to initiate that from and the importance of that. What we're now going to look at the concept of the kick being even, okay? So obviously we've got a downbeat and an upbeat within our dolphin kick or our body wave. And what we need to make sure of is that that wave is actually even in both directions. And again, within most swimmers, we'll tend to have often more of a stronger downbeat and a weaker upbeat, okay? And that might be a result of maybe some of the coaching that they've been exposed to, different practices that it may do more than others, but equally there may be some physical and patterning issues around that. So I like to use vertical kicking for this reason, because it's quite easy just visually to see if the athlete is moving forwards or backwards, all right? Obviously, if they're moving in one direction or the other, and they're not able to stay on the spot, it is telling us that the kick is probably not even in both directions, okay? And I'll say it's easy to see that in a vertical position. So with your fins on still, no need for snorkels. AJ, you might need your snorkel in a minute, but I think you'll be okay for now, all right? We're just going to go arms by your side, in a space, probably just under the flags, so if we can move out towards the flags. So we're going to go arms by our side. We're going to think of all of the same coaching points that we talked about in the first section. So we still want the head to be quite still, all right? We still want to make sure that we are kicking from the sternum, all right? So really pressing that chest forwards and using the whole of that thoracic spine to initiate the kick. But then we're going to see if we can keep on the spot so that we actually kick forwards and backwards of the hip to the same extent. Okay, we're going to go for 20 seconds with this. Okay, and I'm going to count to 20, so I'll try and count really slowly for AJ, okay? Right, 2, 1, up we go. Arms by your side. And let's think about where we are in the lane. And remember, this is kicking from the sternum and from the chest. And relax. Okay, now purposely, so that you can see the two extremes, what I want you to do on this next practice is I want you to kick your downbeat, so in a vertical position, your forwards kick, I want you to do that twice as strong as your backwards kick. So which direction will you move in? Backwards. Yeah, well done. Okay, so again, I'm going to go for about 15 to 20 seconds, okay? but I want a much stronger forwards kick, a much stronger downbeat than I do the back and upbeat, okay? Off we go. Still try and keep the kick coming from the sternum. I want to see you moving that way down the pull. So moving towards the middle of the pull, okay? So twice as strong in the front direction as in the back direction. Okay, and relax. Was that 20, AJ? Did it feel like longer? Okay. All right, now we're going to do the opposite now. Okay, so this time I want you to kick backwards really strongly. So hopefully by the time I've counted to 15/20/25, you're almost back at the wall here. Okay, so off we go. Okay, to pass over to you in a minute, yeah. Good, keep it going. And relax. Okay, good. Now, the reason I've done that is because I want them to understand the kind of doing it wrong sometimes. I think with athletes, it's quite a good coaching practice to maybe not always tell them or give them the feedback ourselves as coaches, but to develop their own awareness of when they're doing something right and wrong. So often if we actually encourage them to see the extremes of the action, hopefully then they can self-correct a little bit better. So I'm going to get you to do one more again, guys. This one is going back to that concept of being even and staying still, okay? So we're going to do one last block of 15 seconds back in your space, okay? This is about staying still again. So back to the first one that we did and making sure that we're staying nice and still on the spot. Okay, so nice even kick in both directions, forwards and backwards of the hip, kicking from the sternum, relaxing the arms by the side. Okay, off we go. So keep pressing that chest. Good. Okay, now relax. Now just stay where you are for a second. Now we covered this in our prone kicking position. What I would like you to do now for me is just for about 10 seconds is to go into a vertical kicking position with your hands touching your temples and your elbows out to the side. Okay? Now again, within our coaching practices, what we're trying to do with young athletes is we are trying to keep them stimulated and we are trying to keep the sessions interesting. But I want you to look again at whether this changes that movement pattern. So when I actually change the arm position, are they then creating that body wave and kicking from the sternum, or are we getting something different that perhaps we don't want to be reinforcing? Okay? So it goes back to appropriateness of when to advance a drill with a certain athlete. Okay, so on to hands on temples, elbows out to the side, up we go. Just for 10 seconds. Yep. Make sure we are still pushing that chest forwards, kicking from the sternum, fingertips on the temples. And relax. Okay, and we'll give you a short breather. It's more for AJ than you guys, don't worry. And then we'll go up into a streamline position. All right, so again, remember the cues. The cues are kick from the sternum, okay? Second cue is making sure that the kick is even, okay? 2, 1, off we go. Arms in streamline. Keep that chin neutral so I can see those faces still. And relax. Okay, but come back into the side then, guys. So I would say in the main that when we went up into streamlining, there was a definite lack of movement through the torso in nearly every case. Okay? So again, it just goes back to what's the purpose of the drill, what's the purpose of the exercise, and is it reinforcing the correct patterning movements? Okay? And we're going to talk about probably 3 key anchoring positions, okay? So in the first position, I'm going to ask AJ to lay out with his hands shoulder width apart. Ideally, the fingertips slightly below the wrist, so that obviously if you were about to do the full pull phase, that would encourage you to get into that early vertical forearm position. So we're literally just going to lay out in the water, snorkel on, facing the head in that neutral alignment position, and we're going to hold that line. Now, we know from Amanda and John's session earlier what some of the restrictions might be in terms of getting into that full overhead position, and it's still relevant now. We also know from some of the exercise that John has just gone through that there may be some stability issues, okay? And quite simply, if we have some restrictions, we're not going to be able to get to full range for the catch. If we have some stability issues, we're going to be rotating perhaps through the shoulders and the hips. So we're going to end up with one limb action slightly different to the other. Okay, so if we want a symmetrical stroke, where we're able to really work that full stroke length, we need to have great stability and mobility. Okay? So we're going to lay out in that first position, and we're going to just adopt an alternating kick. So quite a light, gentle kick behind us, while you just practice elbow sockets ideally facing towards the pool floor, fingertips below the wrists, and head in that nice neutral spine position. Okay, so just on the surface for 125 for me. Okay? So once you've got your snorkels on, critically let's make sure that the fingers are just slightly below the wrist position. Okay? Now, you see with AJ at the moment, probably a little bit tight through his lats and his thoracic spine. So you can see where, as he goes down the length, maybe the elbows are starting to drop a little bit. So again, that comes back to some extra mobility work that your swimmers may need to do before you get into some of these sessions sometimes. Extended mobility and stability pre-pull may actually make your technical session more effective. So just in terms of being quite specific, you know, watching the head positions that the athletes are adopting to make sure we've got that great aquatic alignment. Are they able to have their hands about shoulder width? Are their fingertips slightly below the height of the wrist? Because that's going to become quite critical later on. Do we have the fingers spread or the fingers closed? So ideally we want the fingers to be just slightly apart to improve the surface area of the hand, but not apart too much that we're going to have water drifting through. Okay, so they're all little details that actually means you could probably do that drill for the best part of 10-15 minutes in terms of getting it right and actually setting up from the correct position. Okay? So the next drill going on from that would be what I refer to as the second anchoring position. So if the catch here is our first anchor, there's a mid position here, which I would class as a second anchor. And at that point, you've got the hands directly below the elbows, okay? In some cases, from that point, we're becoming in quite narrow, but at this point here, we're probably talking about hip width, okay? And the hands are slightly in front of the shoulder. Yes, we will be coming back into more of this position later, but for this second phase, hip width, hand below the elbows, elbows slightly in front of the shoulder, and still trying to maintain that head in that neutral spine position. Okay? So alternating kick, and we'll have a little go at position 2 for me on the way back. All right, off we go. Now, I think with younger athletes, trying to explain this position sometimes is quite a challenge. So you may need to get them out on the pool side, get them to show what that looks like. You may need to go through it with them a couple of times, but it's worth doing that to make them understand those key anchoring positions. All right, so again, for the purpose of today, we are going to go through the 3 positions, but that's certainly a drill that I think you would need to spend quite a bit of time on with the younger athletes, getting that head in the right position, getting the elbows, the hands, the shoulders, everything in the right position probably needs a little bit of time spent on that. Now the third anchoring position, all right, so the last part where we really apply some serious force through the underwater pull is through in position 3. So we've got anchoring point 1, anchoring point 2, anchoring point 3. So for me, the hands have come a little bit closer in together underneath the body, but the elbows are still in quite a high, strong position, because that's going to be the very last part of the pull where we're actually going to really drive those tricep muscles into that back push phase, okay? So a bit like Amanda did with some of her drills, we're actually kind of almost freeze framing in time some of these anchoring points, okay? So the third anchoring point underneath the body, again, head in line with the spine. At that point, the elbows need to be coming in a little bit tighter and the hands are close together, okay? We're still going to adopt an alternating kicking action just to keep the body nice and flat. Okay, so we can try position 3 for me. Off we go. Are you done with me? Are you done with me now?
No, I think I've got a bit.
Got a bit.
It was a bit on just doing some land-based kind of like band-based work, reinforcement.
Which part was that in again?
That's the next bit. That's in the pool phase.
The full pull through. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I thought there was one thing. Yeah. Okay, very nice. Very happy with that last position. So again, I think if you go through the 3 positions, it's probably position 2 that the younger athletes will find most challenging, just in terms of awareness and where to put each part of their body. What we're going to do now is probably a little bit of a dot-to-dot exercise, okay? And it looks a little bit like the Beyondy drill, and I'm going to talk about Beyondy in a second, because it is a really prevalent drill that we see being used across our swimming programs. This is a kind of a modified version of Beyondy, in that when you see AJ do this drill, you'll notice that there's not excessive amounts of undulation. So he's going to set up the drill, spend a few seconds just making sure that he is in that nice aquatic alignment position, hands shoulder width apart, fingertips just below the wrists, and then what he's going to do is just actually practice and connect point 1 to point 2 to point 3 and accelerate through, okay? So he's going to basically go through the pull pattern, but as a dot-to-dot exercise between those 3 anchoring positions. Okay, AJ? Yeah, still with the freestyle kick, please. Yeah. So I encourage him to be quite flat on the surface. And what I want to see is obviously that maintenance of a nice high elbow position. So from the catch, getting into an early vertical forearm, trying to keep the elbows high through the movement. And you see that he's quite flat, but we do see quite a significant acceleration through that pull phase. Okay? Now, what I am going to ask AJ to do now is what I would call classic Beyondy drill. And I think one of the messages today that we're trying to get across is that there probably aren't any bad drills, but there perhaps are some drills that are done badly or actually sometimes reinforce incorrect movement. Often when we see Beyondy drill being done, what we get is a layout position, and then the elbows drop low, and then the athlete dives very deep under the water. All right? So I think you've got to look at drills like that and the resulting movement that you get and ask, is that actually reinforcing what I want? So if you're trying to encourage a nice high elbow position to get a great and effective underwater pull, do you want to be doing Beyondy drill where they're dropping their elbows? You've got to make sure that the elbows stay high through the movement. And also, if we're moving away from this excessive undulation now in fly, do you want to see that within a drill? So if we want this amount of undulation, do we then want to be doing drills where we're having this much undulation? All right, and that's maybe challenge the appropriateness of the drills in terms of the movement pattern. So can you just show me one more on the one we've just done, and then one with more of the undulating beyondy? Yep. So 125 on each. Yes, yeah. So one done well now, as in what we've just done, and then one doing the excessive undulations. Yep. So I'm just going to get AJ to go through one more time the drill that we've just done. All right, so this concept of joining the dots between those three key anchoring positions. All right, keeping quite a bit of flatness through the stroke, but really focusing on that high elbow position and the efficiency in the pull. When he comes back, what he's going to do is he's going to do beyondy badly. That's what he's going to do. Right? He's going to do it to show this excessive undulation and the elbow drop at the front of the stroke. Because this is what we often see. We see swimmers disappearing under the water, and actually if you put a camera in front of them, you can see that the elbows are actually dropping in that first phase. So then what we get is swimmers swimming full stroke fly with their elbows doing this as their first movement. And I would question whether that's perhaps because of the use of the drill, but the wrong cues being given in some cases. Okay? So now, you may have noticed from the supine band exercise that AJ just did that as part of the resistance that the band applied to the exercise, he was having to really accelerate through that back part of the movement to overcome the resistance. And again, that's very similar to what we want to try and encourage in the stroke technique of the pull pattern. So initially, there's that time taken to really catch hold of the water, and we have a slightly wider position coming into a narrower position in position 2 to 3. And at that point, our hands are also accelerating much quicker. And as we start to talk about the recovery now, that for me becomes really critical again. Because if the hand speed does not increase through the back part of the underwater pull, it can make the recovery much more strained. So if you find that your swimmer is quite slow through the back phase in terms of their hand speed, the recovery becomes quite forced. Whereas if you use the momentum through that last part of the stroke, it can actually help to facilitate the first part of the recovery and make it a little bit easier to get those arms round and over. Okay? So we're going to interchange this next drill with a bit of single arm, because we're going to be working on that transfer from the underwater pull into the recovery. So the first drill that we're going to do is we're just going to kick underneath the surface of the water just slightly. So just basically so the body is covered with the water. We're going to go into that lined position, so position 1. So keep referring back to these positions. And we're going to do one skull. All right, so we're going to remind ourselves about that pull pattern in those 3 phases and the acceleration. Then we're just going to draw our arms back into position 1 again. Take a little bit of time to reset, okay, because making sure you pull from the right position is important. Okay, so if we start our pull from here, it's not going to be a great pull. So always go back to position 1. And on the second one, we're going to transfer that into one skull, one swim. All right, so the second time, you'll do your skull, same pattern, anchoring points 1 to 3, but you accelerate into one recovery. And then we'll reset again, so it's a bit of a stop-start drill. And then we're going to do one skull into 2 recovery strokes. By that point, I think AJ will probably be about at the wall. For you guys, if you then have to progress that into 3 arm strokes, then that's where you would go next, okay? So it's one skull, that you've just practiced at the end of the last drill. Then it's one skull, one swim. Then it's one skull, 2 swim, okay? And we're going to keep this, for the purpose of this drill, as an alternating kicking action. And we are going to keep our snorkels on. All right? So the snorkel's on, head in that neutral alignment position. So AJ, if you could do a couple of 25s for me on that. Yeah. Bit of rest at the far end, yeah? One skull. So one skull, one swim, one skull, 2 swim, yeah. And then stop, and then start that again, coming back. Yeah. All right, so the importance is that you do reset into position 1 for every single skull. All right, so the message to your younger athletes is not to rush the reset. So one skull, one swim, one skull, 2 swim. And then you can progress that through. All right, and that drill specifically is about accelerating the end of the underwater pull phase to facilitate a nice relaxed recovery. Okay? So it's working on recovery, but it's working on that aspect of it, the initial part of the recovery. Can you do the same back again, AJ, for me, please? And you guys can start when you're ready. Okay. Your snorkels on? And again, if you need to break this down, so it might be that within your coaching sessions, you would just do a few 25s of just sculling to reinforce that underwater pull pattern. Then you may just simply go one scull, one swim. And you may do that for a number of 25s to reinforce that. Because you're still going to have to keep going back to, are you doing the pull pattern right? Are you accelerating through the pull, etc. So there's going to be lots of points that you'll need to reinforce. Right, Summer, shall we have a go then? Have a little go at that for 2 25s? Yeah, off you go. Oh. I think what we'll find with some of the younger athletes is they will rush that reset, whether it's in the pool, whether it's on dry land. We always need to make sure we keep cueing that setup position, okay? What? All right, and then once we've had some feedback, if we can come back on the same drill. Now, again, I've talked about some progressions of that. I do also like to do some single arm butterfly work. But again, this is probably an opportunity where we have to look at whether we're getting the right movement. So in the main to start with, I would tend to do a single arm butterfly with the arm that's not moving by the side, and I'd probably also do it with a snorkel on to start with, okay? So again, we're still working on the pull pattern and the acceleration of the pull into the recovery. Within this drill, I'd also like to see a slightly soft elbow coming through to keep the strain off the shoulder. So if we go into full extension, we often get a lot of stiffness and fatigue through the shoulder. So a little bit of elbow bend helps to keep the shoulder nice and relaxed. There's lots and lots of different ways that you can obviously do single arm. And I'm just going to talk through maybe some common faults that we see in each of those variations. Okay? So first of all, I'm going to get AJ to do one length down to the middle. Okay? Single arm fly, left arm by his side, right arm moving, okay? He's now going to revert to doing a fly kick, so we've got that kind of timing issue now to add in, which is why I like to start this drill with a snorkel on. So at the point where they're now thinking about the kick and the kick through the pull phase, they're not also having to worry about what the head's doing. All right, so try and layer the drills and maybe just add one point in at a time, so you're still making sure that the basics are not lost. Okay? So just do one for me. Just one. Yeah, and wait, that's it. You also notice that from the drills today, we've taken away all of the underwater phase. So short course pulls are great for skill work, but often you can spend 10, 15 meters underwater. So when you're doing drills, I think it's sometimes a good idea just to come back away from the underwater phases while you're actually doing the drills. It gives you more chance to practice that element. All right, so I'm going to get AJ to do this slightly differently now. So what I'm going to ask him to do, first of all, is single arm fly, but with the other arm in front, okay? So this is not how he normally does it. And what I'm not saying is that this isn't how you should do it, but I want you to look at what happens to the drill. All right, so he's going to have his left arm now extended, still moving his right arm, exactly the same coaching points as before, okay? we go. Pardon? No, I want you to pause on it, yeah. So, what we often find with this drill is that the younger swimmers start to pause at the front of the stroke. So, they come to meet the other arm, and then often their hands drop beneath the surface. They come back up, and they end up actually doing the pull with the elbow dropped. So, there's no issue with doing it with one arm out in front, but what I ask you to do is just to look at the resulting movement, okay? Because we see a lot of our young fly swimmers diving down under the water at the front of the stroke and then dropping their elbows on the initial part of the pull. And then if I watch them in some of their drill sessions, I see a lot of that drill being done like this. And what I would say is that it's probably the drill that's causing the fall in the main stroke. So we think we're doing the drills and we think it's helping, but actually sometimes it's contradictory. Okay? AJ, can you take your snorkel off for me now? Guys, you can have a little go at that for me. So with your snorkels on, we're going to go single arm fly. We'll do 25 on each arm with the arm that's not moving down by your side for me. Okay, so Helen and John, if you can set those guys off. AJ, I'm going to get you to go back into the arm at the side position, but breathe every 2 for me. Okay? Just 125. Yeah. Now, the other challenge that you've got with single arm is that it will perturb the body. All right? So you will find that the potential of the rotation starts to get greater again. So when they're doing single arm, are their pelvis and shoulders still level, or are you seeing too much rotation? And that's where you may want to integrate some of the stability exercises that John just went through with you. So if you're finding that when you progress to doing a single arm drill on butterfly, that you're actually getting a lot of rotation through the body, it might just be as simple as you cueing that to the athlete, and they may be able to make that change within the drill. But it may also be worth you getting them out on poolside to demonstrate that, so they're actually aware of the fact that the body is moving, okay? Now, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to ask AJ now. So you'll notice on that drill that AJ was breathing every 2, and he was breathing forwards, okay? Another thing that we often see with fly drills is swimmers breathing to the side, okay? So again, unless you're going to do that within the full stroke, is it appropriate to do that in the drill? All right, that's probably a question that you need to challenge yourself with. But secondly, what actually happens to the pull pattern? So in the main, what we see when we have fly breathing to the side is a hand that enters the water and then pushes laterally from the shoulder way too far, and we end up with a pull pattern that's out here. Okay? So again, it's about when we prescribe a drill for a particular reason, we've got to really look at that movement in the water and decide whether they're actually then doing the right movement. All right, so we're going to get AJ to do that drill now, but breathing to the side. Okay? Yes. Yep. So straight away, because his head's turning to the side, there's a lot more rotation through his torso. The hand's slipping laterally of the shoulder, and it's pulling way wider than what we were trying to get over to him during our initial anchoring and sculling drills. Okay, so swimmers, can we go back on the other arm now? So a single arm fly again, one arm by your side. Okay, off we go. AJ, can you put your snorkel back on, please? All right, so we're gonna layer this now into full stroke. So we've got all the elements that we're now trying to piece together. Again, what I'm going to ask AJ to do is not do too much underwater to start with, but just do the push and glide and go straight into the full stroke. And I just want him to try and put a few key elements together. The first thing, the most fundamental thing, is he really using his torso? So is he creating that body wave from his sternum? And is his torso connecting his limb actions effectively? Okay? So if we've lost that patterning of that dolphin body wave from the sternum, we may need to go back and intersperse that drill with some of our limb drills. We may need to keep reminding those younger swimmers of the need to do that. Because if that's now lost in this drill, the drill will fall apart and so will the full stroke. So I'm going to ask him to swim full stroke fly, fins and snorkel, just 125, working on kicking from the sternum, trying to think about the anchoring positions and the acceleration through the arm pull, and then the recovery, so nice and low to the surface, elbows slightly soft, and making sure that his entry is soft at the front to re-engage onto the next pull. Okay, we go. So if you put your snorkels back on as well, we're going to have a little go at this. Now, AJ's very good at getting those hands nice and soft on entry. So we don't see a lot of splash or heavy-handedness within his fly. But that goes back to that linkage between the drive of the chest. Right? If he was kicking from his hips or his legs, you would probably see those hands slapping and splashing on the water. Okay? So if you see that, it's probably worth going back to some of those earlier body wave drills. Okay, swimmers, let's have a go then. So just have a look at where you can see a good example of a young swimmer who is able to keep that kick from the sternum, and where perhaps we have some mobility or patterning issues, which means that the stroke's a little bit disjointed or the hands are entering heavy on the water, all right? So the framework we've kind of given you today is about layering drills, but I do think in a lot of cases there's a need to go back to some of the basics. So it may be that we get onto some single arm drills or some scull swim drills, and you may have a couple of swimmers in that lane who are doing 150 on the scull swim and 150 just on a body wave kick drill. And they may just keep alternating that to remind themselves of what they individually need to work on. And that's quite an easy way of managing a big group, doing the same session, but actually reaching out to the individuals within the context of that session. Right, AJ, I'm going to get you to do full stroke now. So we'll ask you to do about 10 meters underwater off the wall, no snorkel. So the breathing is going to come back in again, as we saw at the end of the single arm. In terms of a cue point, what I would say in terms of the head position is that we need to ensure, obviously, that the chin stays nice and close to the surface and it pushes forwards. But at the point where we come through the back of the push and the hands come past the shoulders, the head must return to the water in advance of the hands. Okay? So again, that might be something you've got to spend a little bit more time on with the individual athlete. Something you might need to do on poolside to just reiterate that a little bit more carefully. But the key thing is for me is that the chin obviously stays nice and low and it sits on the surface of the water as we pull back. We accelerate through, and at that point, as the hands are coming through the recovery, they cross the line of a shoulder. The head must at that point be returning to the water in advance of the hands. Okay? Because again, the timing of the breathing may be another reason why you see the stroke disjointed. Okay? So let's do one more 25 for me, AJ, please, and then we're done. Right, swimmers. So we're going to do one last 25 for me. Full stroke fly. This is about making it look the best it's looked all session. And again, I suppose just a final point, we do see some of our best world-class athletes breathing every stroke. In the main, I think we're trying to encourage with our young swimmers breathing every 2, because at least it helps return to that nice flat aquatic alignment position in between. But it goes back to the movement. If you've got an athlete who can breathe every stroke and they can return into a great aquatic alignment position, it's probably not a huge issue that they breathe every stroke. But in the main, for our younger swimmers, we probably want to be advocating breathing every 2, so it helps them to actually understand how to return back to that position. And it will hopefully then help to encourage that nice continuity and flow within the stroke. Okay?